Hey,
Go ahead, Tim.
this is simple. Hey, thanks for joining us. I know we've had some preparatory meetings leading up to this, so welcome all. I'm going to start just by giving an overview of what we're trying to do today as we're working and continuing on ways to collaborate. I just wanted to remind folks of the big picture, what we're working on here together. There's this notion, of course, that the world is changing, and it's changing quickly, and especially in this digital governance or areas where businesses are digitalizing. I just made up a word there, but digitalizing their content and their business. And because the world is changing and changing quickly, it's going to create gaps. It's going to create winners and losers. The fast adopters are going to catch on, and others could frightfully be left behind if they're not careful. So because this is changing quickly and there's going to be some folks left behind, we wanted to provide our view of the promised land and our cure for the sickness, which really is this what we kind of call a phase zero, and it's a governance policy to work on with leaders. And through our discussions that we've had one-on-one, we've just really nailed this notion that there's this business need to do this, and this maybe isn't even necessarily, or upfront anyway, an IT or information technology discussion, but one we really want to have with business leaders. So as we kick this off, Dave's going to go into detail. We're not going to finish today. I'll just give you that disclaimer too. We've got a lot of content here, and we want to save some for future meetings because we want to hit this in the appropriate amount of detail. So as we're going, I'll ask for this to be conversational. So interrupt us at any time and where appropriate, and ask questions so that we can have that dialogue. We'll get as far as we can today, and hopefully it leaves a teaser for the next session to get through the additional parts of this. But the idea is that this is a way to lead in for sales and to get business leaders and then ultimately IT leaders thinking about how they digitize their business workflows and the like. And with that, I'll hand it off to Dave, and I will monitor the chat window. If you have chat, some things you want to do, I'll interject appropriately. If you just want to type in or text via the chat window some questions you have or comments, those will be obviously captured, and we'll address them as they come in. So with that, Dave, please go ahead with the presentation, and let's see how far we get in this next 54 minutes.
Absolutely, and do know that we'll take a couple of minutes, about every 15 minutes. We'll stop and ask for any questions and try to address any questions that you put into the chat text conversation. We definitely want to move forward in looking at our approach, and an approach that has been successful as we've worked through our corporations and worked with our partners in defining that. We're going to be talking. Go ahead.
So any questions then before we start, or anything that you'd love to see or things you want us not to miss, gentlemen? Any expectations?
None from me at this point. Anxious to see your play and kind of go from there.
Okay.
You bet. Thank you, Brian. That's great. Well, let's go ahead and move forward. We're going to be talking about governance and policies and some of the guidelines of questions. And we approach this in a very, when we work with a client or we work with a business, we approach this in a very Socratic questioning process. We want to make sure that we are asking questions not only to guide the customer, but to be able to help them understand the kind of questions they need to be asking and the information they need to be looking at. What makes it different here is that we're moving into a digital workplace, and there are specific questions that need to be asked different from what is normally asked in any type of web interface or any type of tool interface that we enable within the tool. So there'll be specialized questions that we need to make sure that we're approaching and asking. We want to be able to empower the digital workspace. Most important to our user experience and our employee experience is how do we make sure that they have a trusted workspace in order to do the work. Some of the decisions that we're going to be looking at is, what are the enterprise decisions? What type of information architecture? What kind of content organization? Content lifecycle management. What does that mean? Are we going to put in place the record selection, the records SharePoint environment? What operational decisions will we be making for disposition and disposal of content, data, files, records, etc.? What are some of the decisions that need to be made around how we're going to communicate across the digital ecosystem? HR needs to be involved, legal needs to be involved. And what is the individual user content? How are we going to use OneDrive for Business? How is that information going to be different than what we use in SharePoint or Yammer, or how are we putting that into OneNote? What are the components of our decision making that we need to look at? And we want to make sure that we expose those types of governance planning and working with, quote unquote, with, because that's very important to our clients. We also want to make sure that we're approaching the enterprise social engagement, understanding how does or what is the social engagement in the enterprise, and how does it impact the digital workspace and overall the digital ecosystem that we are working with our clients to implement and deploy. What are the roles and responsibilities? We'll talk a little bit about that in later conversation. What are the things that we need to prepare for that is unique and different in the digital workplace, that is different than what we normally see, or how is it alike in many ways? What are site solution specific decisions? Who are going to be the owners of the solutions? It may even range from being a product owner for a specific tool that is enabled in Office 365, and it may have very specific security roles and responsibilities that need to go on. You know, and I highlight over on the side, it is so important that if we don't have the right conversation with the right people at the right time and in the right manner, we often miss the mark. And that's why we really want to work with our clients to help them understand what it is, and working with our partners as well. We need to have that information available so that our partners are not trying to figure things out on the fly. We want to be able to put that planning together. We'll talk more about that. When we look at completing a O365 governance plan before deploying it, one of the differentiators for us is that we want our clients to be able to do this first, even before they start migrating their email, before they start talking about that. We want to get the stakeholders together, decision makers, and we want to make sure that they understand that the failure to plan is planning to fail. And once they understand that and they go forward with that, then we have a governance plan that can be adopted, and it will improve our adoption of Office 365 going forward. It's a playbook that is a guide on how it'll be used in the organization. I've done this with a very large insurance company here in St. Paul in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and this was the most powerful meeting for 6 weeks that we've ever done, and I've had so much more success, and our adoption rates went through the roof because we thought about what we were going to do, we decided on what we were going to do, and we executed as we deployed across the entire O365 engagement. It was a golden opportunity for us to go forward. So assigning those responsibilities, the access levels, who's going to be responsible for who, what, where, when, and how is very important. Some of the things within this presentation that we're going to be moving forward on is we're going to address enterprise level decision making. That means all business units. What are the technical decisions that we need to make in order to define how this develops into a trusted engagement? What are the processes that we're going to use? What types of content do we deal with, and what is the value? Anywhere from being large blob technology with very large maps or videos, all the way through individual files in Word docs. What's our strategic direction? What's our roadmap? How are we going to deploy? When are we going to deploy? And what are we going to make available so we have the best user experience that we can find? And then, of course, legal has many implications and includes security as well. Let's talk a little bit about governance as a whole in a digital ecosystem. Anything that is excluded is not complete governance. It's incomplete, meaning that every business unit needs to participate, engage, and learn what decisions they need to make, and they need to have empowerment into. Here I really drive this home in that governance is a combination of people, policies, and processes that the company needs to work with. Without the business engaged, too many times the implementation of Office 365, no matter how technically good it is and how well we turn the lights on, it's incomplete because it's not inclusive to the business units themselves. And here's where we actually pull back. We say, look, IT, you're a business unit. We need to know what your processes are, what your procedures are, along with our business. And we need to make sure that engagement is a whole. We need to be able to be very measurable in our processes. We need to identify what are the KPIs that we're going to obtain. We know that our number one KPI that will measure whether we're successful or not is our adoption rates. Not how well or how long people are using Skype or how well and how long they're using Yammer. It is, have they adopted it? And what the definition of adoption really means is very critical to the business. That doesn't mean the lights are on and the tool is available in the tiles within Office 365. It means they're using it. They're engaged with it. They're using it as for social collaboration, for work collaboration. It's engaged and moving forward. Again, I cannot emphasize the adoption by both stakeholders and users is so important. The higher the adoption, our ability to select and craft policies, the smarter we are, the more intelligent and intelligence that we put into our governance plan provides that trusted environment, and it keeps things moving forward. The better that we can do in providing that empowerment and that level of engagement, the higher our adoption rates will be. Office 365 gives us a great work around a guidebook. It is a living document. It is not something that is, oh, here it is, put it on the shelf and it'll collect dust. No, this needs to be used through our organization. It needs to be quickly reviewed, and it needs to have an organizational approval before even putting it up for full use. It identifies the lines of ownership. When a question comes back, well, I'm a site owner on a SharePoint site. I want to know what my roles, my responsibilities are. Can I create a secondary admin? Do I need to create one specially for security? All those questions are things that we ask during the workshops. We establish the policies of use, the rules, which are the guardrails, and the boundaries that we put together. Here again, we are not discouraging or limiting the use of Office 365, but we establish the guardrails and the boundaries that empower the business to move forward. And we revisit those on a regular basis. An effective governance plan ensures the system is well managed, that not only is IT keeping the lights on and enabling the tools as our strategic roadmap puts it forward, but we're business minded. We're not trying to just use the IT model and keep things moving forward. We want the business to use this. We want them to move into a digital workplace and for us to form a digital ecosystem moving forward. Technically competent teams are our most critical path in our initial startup, but not the critical path in our long-term support and maintenance of it, because we need to make sure that the operational tools are configured and are doing what we have planned for it to do. Want to make sure that the folks that are engaged in our Center of Excellence, for example, with Office 365, have the training, the education, they have the certifications that are necessary to be able to quickly and effectively resolve any questions that we might have in supporting the environment. This includes the help desk and the call center, making sure that they are very aware of what their responsibilities are and they have that capability moving forward. Again, we do this all in the beginning instead of doing it on the fly. Very, very important in our processes, and we'll explain why in a few minutes. The primary objective...
Hey, Dave.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
I'm sorry to interject. This is John from Microsoft. How are you?
Good.
If we could at some point talk about some of the realities that we face, which are having to do it on the fly when it hasn't been done appropriately at the beginning or in the middle, or in some cases when customers believe they're doing it at the end, which, as we know, it never ends. So maybe we can talk about some of those realities, what happens when you don't have those conversations up front.
Sure. Want to give us an example, John, real quick? Just the one that you know that's been very painful?
Oh, sure. Many of my clients, their version of deployment is, and many have come through an acquisition or divestiture. So they were thrust into their Office 365 environment. And as things might yet progressed, they found themselves upgrading to the modern platform and having a tremendous amount of the services turned on, provisioned, and available to users. But there's been nothing to formally deploy it, roll it out, educate, train, and provide the governance structure. Yammer is an example of things that get turned on and people start to use it. And we have other clients that have turned things on and haven't gone through or asked any of those questions. So as you can imagine, one, they're at risk, and two, they're trying to play catch up. Pandora's kind of out of the box. So there's real life scenarios where you start to see technology sprawl without any of the governance. We also see it where our competitors are talking to the business, and we're seeing a preponderance of competitive point solutions emerge. They're coming across the same issues, right?
Yep.
No governance, and an internal viral adoption, if you will. So there's some of the examples.
Well, here's an example that I ran into at a very large utility organization that covers the Western United States. When we first engaged, and I began to say, look, we need to have governance around Yammer. They were running a garage sale out of Denver. And in that garage sale, they were selling weapons, which is typical for them, and ammunition, which is illegal. They were basically holding a large garage sale that included things that we were not comfortable with, and we had to shut them down. We had to pull the reins back and say, whoa, 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 hold it. We can't be doing that on a corporate organization at this level. And we lost a lot of users almost immediately when we started to pull the reins in. It's better to set those guardrails, like John said, at the beginning, and set those boundaries so they know what they can use, where they can use it, and in what manner they can use it. That I think adds, John, to what you were saying. Thank you for injecting that. I appreciate it.
Sure.
The last thing I wanted to make sure that we were very aware of in our governance is that this is people infrastructure. We are here not only to make sure the lights are on from an IT standpoint, but we're here to make sure that folks are looking at it as a people infrastructure. What is it they do on a day-to-day operation? Because they're making a cultural change, moving from perhaps a paper-based environment, hard copy, into a digital world. What does that mean for them? What is the impact to them? It could be a complete culture shift in how they manage their day-to-day operations, especially if we're asking them to put stuff into OneDrive for business. They know to move it for personal stuff there. They need to move it over to SharePoint, for example, and maybe they're having conversations where they have files that are on Yammer. It's a whole new world, and it needs to have very specific guardrails and boundaries moving forward. And that's something that we want to make sure that we talk about and we expose in our governance planning. How do we, our most important aspect of this, again, is adoption. How do we measure that? What are the ways that we need to evaluate it? What are the ways? We can certainly measure through the Office 365 portal. We can know how many users are holding conference calls, how many are texting strictly, or how many are using both, how many are using video. Those technical aspects we can always drive, but we really need to look at what our people infrastructure is looking like and how it moves forward. I'll take a quick little break. Do you have any questions?
Dave, this is Tim. I have a comment as we're moving on to this next slide to pull this kind of full circle. I was just speaking yesterday to a very small startup company in Louisiana that provides hardware for the oil drilling industry. And this talk with this entrepreneurial and go-getter that's the head of it said, well, yeah, I have Office 365, but I need a way to track and communicate this. When people think of O365, they think of the basics. They think of Excel and Outlook, but they're not thinking about Team. They're not thinking about Yammer. They're not thinking about some of these more collaborative things for tracking items. And just a couple, mentions of that and a fast review just really turned on a light bulb for them. And the reason I'm mentioning that is a big part of this is Dave and I had a conversation the other day talking about how we almost wanted to stop using the word plan in our vernacular, how we plan for these things, and use one that we definitely used in the military, gentlemen, and that is we want to prepare. not only are we just planning what we're going to do, we're going to prepare for contingencies. And an adage that we take from the military is that our training is never complete. And so a big part of the services that we provide along with this, and Dave will get to this later and probably not even today, but it's the training. It's just that awareness that's part of this governance. It's, did you know that these tools do this, this, and this, and you probably already have them. And I know, John, that you mentioned this and come along for the ride that people potentially don't have enough exposure to, and if they only knew it, boy, they'd be exploiting it. So with that, I'd like you to ponder, even next time, if we start using that word, how we want to prepare them, not just plan for them, but we want to prepare our clients for these migrations and these movements. Thanks for letting me interject, Dave.
Yeah, this is Delaire too. Actually, just to add on to that, I saw an article the other day on LinkedIn. I forget who posted it, but just all about GDPR, and it's, are you aware? I mean, some people aren't even aware of what it is. When's it coming out? Are you prepared for it? I mean, that's just another really hot topic around just preparation for something that's about to go live, and that's GDPR.
Absolutely, and if we don't prepare for it, by meaning that we have awareness and we have accepted responsibilities, we will continue to do that. And it's so important that we put that into our governance planning, that we know and understand what is our approach, what are our restrictions, what are our empowerments that we need to move forward with that. And John, I know you and I have long talked about that as well. So Delaire, thank you. That was excellent. Any other questions real quick or comments? Okay, we'll continue moving forward. In our governance workshops, we not only need to understand what it is in the digital environment, but we need to understand that there may be things like equipment. I know a large retail and manufacturing company recently did not think about how they were planning to deploy Skype for Business telephony. That meaning that how are they going to have conference calls in conference rooms? How are they going to use that and plan for their integration into their PBX? How are they going to put this together? And they wound up putting a Band-Aid on the effect buying individual third-party product in order to have a small conference room have 5 to 10 people talking, instead of everybody bringing their PC to the table. They found that they had to quickly go out and purchase several tens of thousands of dollars in this equipment, deploy it globally. Had they given good thought and prepared, as Tim had said, and prepared their reason for this, they would have been able to avoid that equipment debacle that happened and the fast-moving reactionary mode in order to do that. So there are many things that we need to look at in governance, and storage is a big question. Do we buy additional SharePoint storage when we use up our 6 terabytes of data, or do we integrate our Azure storage capability, which is less costly? Many things need to be evaluated. How is advertising and marketing and HR going to plan our branding? How are we going to do it internally and externally? What configurations are we going to make? What is our employee experience going to look like, our EX? What is our user interface going to look like, especially around call centers and help centers? What training are we going to provide down to the end user? What training are we going to provide for our top line Center of Excellence global admins? We need to, there's a big difference in the level of training that we need to engage in that. Are we going to provide custom development? Are we going to do that? Is that on our strategic roadmap, or is that something that's an immediate requirement? We need to prepare for those conversations. And then how are we going to support this? What's our level 1, level 2, level 3, all the way to Microsoft Premier Services for level of support? How are we going to deal with backups? Microsoft backs up Office 365. How do we get to it? Where do we go? Are we going to do our own? What is that? If we have a hybrid environment, how are we going to direct that? And so we need to prepare that conversation. Even down to SharePoint new sites, if we're going to do that. And there are times that we'll use Teams or times that we'll use SharePoint. How are we going to do that? So if we prepare for that conversation, and by bringing in someone that has experience and knowledge about that, they can help us ask the right questions and prepare for those answers. And that's what we try and do as much as we can. How is Office 365 going to be used? Will it have integration with external sources like PeopleSoft or SAP or other manufacturing product? Are we going to provide business intelligence dashboards? How are we going to use the applications that will be going forward? How do they interface with the different operations? Governance is very important in what we look at. We have to have the right amount of governance. We want to be able to establish the guardrails and the boundaries for our operational in the business. But if we give it too much control, we'll lose our adoption rates. If we don't carefully know and understand what too much is, it'll set us back in our adoption. Or if we put too low, then folks are out there in a green space where they're doing their own thing and making up the rules as they go. We don't want to do that. We want to be prepared in how we move forward. As we move down the pyramid, individuals may have lighter governance on how they use their information in OneDrive for Business. But when we talk about the higher level use of Yammer in a company-wide group, we may have more DLP that's engaged around quarantining words that maybe somebody uses a social security number, or somebody puts in transmits a credit card number. We want to make sure those things are quarantined immediately and the appropriate action is taken. So that's why the pyramid shows that lighter governance going down the pyramid, because it has higher visibility as we go up the pyramid. Very important that we recognize that. In setting up how we will govern this, we need to make sure that we have at least 3 committees. We need to have an executive steering committee, one that actually approves our governance plan, that gives us guidance according to policies and procedures within the company as a whole, and how the ecosystem will be deployed. That executive steering team most often contains our C-level executives and some of our VP level executives. Our governance committee definitely looks at what our governance plan is. Are we doing too much or too little? Do we need to include additional information? They may and will always meet once a month at minimum in order to identify any issues or challenges that we have. Our content committee definitely is driven around information management. What is the content? They will be the ones that will look at Yammer, look at Teams chat. They'll look at Skype for Business chat. They'll determine, are we providing the right guardrails and the boundaries in order to do that? They will always help us set the policy. This policy should not be set by IT to drive this forward. And of course, any of this content information is always, even at the time when we do migration of any data, what are the policies around? Is it company confidential? Is it private? Is it to be public? Migration needs to have those boundaries and guardrails established before we get into actually migrating the data. And that's very, very important. And oftentimes, I can't remember even one company, except Insurance, that actually did that and set the rules about where content would be placed, what rules of engagement that would be placed on that. Does that make sense? Any questions or comments?
Yeah, this is Tim. I've got a comment. As we jump off that slide, it's important to know that executive, that steering committee is their important role. Dave, maybe you can talk about this a second. Is they're the tiebreaker. If that governance committee provides all this information and they're having trouble coming to consensus, you're going to want to make sure that you have it kind of clearly stated that at some point somebody might have to break a tie. If there's a 50-50 benefit / risk to an item, somebody just has to make that call. And that's really why you have a separate executive committee in addition to that governance committee or that steering committee. Correct, Dave? I mean, just setting those roles and responsibilities, maybe talk about that a second.
Absolutely. I think it's very important that that preparation takes place, because what we have found in working with these different corporations is that they don't even know the right questions to ask. They need to have and go through that Socratic processing. That the more that we open doors, the more doors that are open. And that happens time and time again. When we start asking questions to guide them to asking additional questions and help them understand what their the features, the functions, and the potential benefits are, they can then set those policies. We give them the right information they need going forward. And
Yeah,
Tim,
so
you're
this
absolutely
governance,
right.
yeah, so this governance team can do a lot of the management, and that's just providing pretty simple solutions to problems. But that steering committee is going to solve what I call the dilemmas, the ones that, those issues that don't have clear cut, black and white
Yep.
answers, and that's why they're so very necessary.
And back to the point that I think, John, you made is many companies do this on the fly. And we will still continue to do things and improve the living document of the governance plan. We'll continue to improve, but we need to do as much preparation as we possibly can going forward. All right. Let's take
Dave, just for your information, John Alberta typed into the chat box, bingo. I think we hit the target there on that one, so great work.
Yeah. A typical digital governance workplace change that we have seen over time, and I put this at a slant because I put our slant on it a little bit, in that, we really see that there is when they put Office 365 out there, great, wonderful, oh, this is so cool. What is it? What do you mean? I got to use it now? And what we find is that we get at a real high point, but when it's a lot of excitement around it, is that there's a lot of shock and pain about the new way of doing things. And folks get, why do I have to use this? What's in it for me? Why am I being forced to do this now when nobody's trained me, nobody's told me about what we're doing? And they get angry and they go, I'm not using this. I'm going back to the old way. I just want things to change back the way they were. Forget this new way of doing stuff. And that really brings us to a point where we have to stop, reevaluate, and identify our preparation. And we start to get we get a lot of resistance for climbing up that hill. The businesses will tell us, this doesn't work. Things aren't right. You didn't tell me what I was supposed to do, or your product sucks. It just doesn't work. And it's not true, because what we have found, even with Skype for Business, is that they didn't know and understand how to use it because it was different than WebEx. And the resistance was great. Granted, there were technical issues, but we resolved those. Now we had to go back because they got angry and they abandoned us. Now we need to bring them back to that. So we need to help them understand acceptance. We need to support them, which we didn't support in the first. And then we finally get to a point over time at a very costly hill, we get to healing and development. But let's take a different approach. Let's do it right out of the box. Let's engage the ProSci-AdCar process. Let's make sure that we through a series of governance workshops, we get awareness out there, and we do a better job with marketing and campaigning. We need to help our business clients, our customers, understand what is the need for this digital change. Why do we want to do this? We want them to understand the nature of the digital change, get excited about it, to develop a desire to move that direction. Get a lot of early adopters, a lot of cheerleaders, a lot of champions that will really get involved, and they'll help us move it forward. So we want to be able to provide support to them, which will garner and gather up our desire to participate in the digital change. We want to make sure that we provide them with the knowledge of what that change is going to be like in the digital workplace, not just the workplace. How and what is that impact? What's the change in are we changing a full paradigm of how we're using this? That's a big deal for a lot of folks that have been there 20 and 30 years. They go, I'm doing just fine. Leave me alone. Well, oftentimes, way too many oftentimes, we've found that just giving them the opportunity to be engaged and develop that awareness, that desire, they gain their own knowledge. I can give you an example. I worked with a pseudo-government agency, and once they had great awareness once I talked to them about what they were wanting to do, how they wanted to get there. They had a great desire. They were just eager, and they wanted to get involved. I gave them the knowledge on how to make that change and how to move into that digital workplace. And I mean, they got so excited, they excited the rest of the entire organization. It was almost like an M80 going off just from the planning department that all of a sudden said, hey, do you know about this? Let me tell you about this. Here's the knowledge. Here's where to go. Here's what we can do. And now comes along the ability to do those things. I had one executive planner actually go in and start changing the ribbon within SharePoint because they'd gone out and bought their own books. They wanted to get more knowledge. They were eager. They were hungry because we had made them aware, developed their desire. Now they expanded their knowledge. Now they have the ability to do things, even though we really didn't want them doing that. But we had them demonstrate the ability. And then we reinforced it through additional support. We gave support and help desk the knowledge base that they needed, and we reinforced it. We built a culture and competence around that digital ecosystem. To this day, because of their awareness, the knowledge, and the ability that we built, that planning team belongs to the Minnesota SharePoint Users Group, and they are very engaged, and they help others do it as well. And that was because we attacked it in the right method. We prepared them for that transition.
Hey, Dave.
Go ahead, please.
Can I make a comment? I mean,
Yeah.
As we start to talk about, organizational change management, and you look at ADKAR and kind of, what are the key things that drive, individual change. And it's funny how you were saying about that SharePoint Users Group, they bought a book, and we didn't really want them doing that. You made that comment.
Yep.
And I'm just curious as to the context for the comment, because it's interesting. Maybe you could share with me the context in which you said that.
Sure.
Before I make the comment that triggered that thought. So could you tell me the?
Yeah. Here, and what I meant, I apologize for not articulating that very well. We didn't want to making changes at the level that they were making changes in the ribbon without proper knowledge and proper security being in place. We wanted them to learn about it, but we wanted to make sure, because we did not do our due diligence as quickly as we should have, because we didn't have the opportunity to do it in the beginning and set the governance plan. We didn't set the guardrails and the boundaries, and without doing that, then we run into situations where they'll make changes because they're learning about those changes. I should have done a much better job in preparing them for what kind of changes they needed to engage and how they were going to do those. In the long run, the only reason I say that is because they deleted the button to go back to the home page. I didn't want them doing that.
Yeah.
And I take responsibility for that. That was how I learned. I made a mistake.
Yeah.
And I learned from that mistake, and from now on, that's one of the guardrails that we put in place.
I also think it really does bring to mind some of the changes that we're starting to see within the platform, and how there's a shift of where does governance, who controls the platform. I mean, it's at some point we all start to recognize that our end users are going to figure things out at some point, whether we publish it or whether they find it on their own. And we're starting to see that our clients that have released many of the stuff within the Office 365 wheel are reacting to the uptake.
Yep.
But at some point, we have to acknowledge that Microsoft is going to continue to push more and more technology, through its cloud services platforms between Office 365 and Azure. And as we do that, our clients are going to struggle to keep pace.
Yep.
So where does the ultimate shift of power? Who controls the platform? Does it become IT, or does it become the business community over time? And that's where I think we're starting to see our clients asking those questions. Governance done right and done up front is one thing. And maybe this is where I think you can help us. What are the roles and responsibilities that we see today from a governance, and then how do we see that changing? That to me is an interesting, and timely conversation that we're having with our clients.
You bet. And here's where I see that our clients are. I agree with you, John, 100%. Thank you for the comment. It was very good. You need subject matter expertise to be owning those products and those designs that come out of Microsoft, and how they're improving our digital workplace and the new tools that are coming in. Without that level of subject matter experts and developing that within the organization, within the business, granted, we have to include business unit IT as part of that conversation, but they should not be the final drivers on how we're going to implement and deploy. We need to go back to our governance committee. They need to be well informed on the feature, functions, and the benefits that are potentially to be placed on the roadmap. And our executive team needs to know and understand that these are the decisions that we are making, because they're ultimately accountable and responsible for those decisions and how we deploy it. I think that the Center of Excellence is often one methodology that is used by a business, and that Center of Excellence has a representative from IT, but it also has representatives across the business. And those folks need that training and that product knowledge. They need to have access to a knowledge base that provides them those capabilities that are on the roadmap, and when and how we deploy it. And again, I point back to the fact that it is their responsibility to inform and to consult and place that ownership back on those committees that own that deployment in the business, as they would with any product that the business is currently using. Does that make sense, John?
It does, and I think that's what makes it a little bit more, I think, unique, right? When you talk about, a platform like SAP,
yep,
right? That's an application. That's a platform that some would say that's an ecosystem, right? But people understand the owners of SAP, right? When you say Office 365 or Modern Workplace, no one really owns that other than IT, right?
Today, we want to change that.
That's right. That's right. So that's the change, right? That's where some of the roles around governance and the members of the steering committee and, some of the cadence going forward of who's going to make decisions. We see more and more of our clients within IT asking the question, should we be overly involved, or should we let our end users and should we let the platform owners make those decisions? So these are interesting and timely conversations that we're having.
The way that
I have a comment on that too, that builds on the preparation versus planning item that I mentioned earlier. But the simple guidance that I give during these is that we want these committees to act more like firemen instead of policemen. Sometimes you can kind of be viewed as we're the cops. We're going to arrest people for not following these policies. You're going to get a ticket for going out of the rails. When the fact is it's quite the opposite. We're the EMTs and the police, the firemen. We're here to help, and we're here to keep you safe and rescue and do those and collaborate. And so it's that simple analogy that I've seen strike a chord before. So I just wanted to input that quickly. Thanks.
That's great. Wouldn't that be nice?
Yes,
yep.
It would be. And I think let me give you an example of something that worked very well. When we set this up at a university here in Minnesota, that university had been basically a greenfield in the past. What we did is we gave ownership back to the business units within the university, and we then met once a month to talk about their experiences, their challenges, and some of the new opportunities that were going to be coming on the strategic roadmap. There were times when those site collection owners were very engaged because they had responsibility and accountabilities that they were empowered to control. When a new product came along, they knew that and understood that this product was going to be is going to appear on their tiles within Office 365, and they needed to make sure that training was prepared and established and available. That opportunity was given to them to schedule that on their basis, because they knew their units and business better than anybody else did. But it was the responsibility of that Center of Excellence team to make sure they were aware and that they were moving forward. And it worked seamlessly for them to do that, and the exchange of information. When somebody had tried something new that was already existing, it was out of the box, they shared it with the rest of the site collections administrators, who then shared it with their other teams, and it exponentially grew. And when a new product came along, it was like, didn't you hear about this? Let me tell you about it. Here's my example of using it. That was the most powerful way to get that information out, so that not only did they know who to go to for support with another site collection administrator, but they helped each other. They became their own peer support teams to support themselves, and instead of calling the help desk or the service desk, who was aware and had knowledge of it, but they relied upon each other. And that was the most powerful support method of all these new capabilities that were down the road. So let's move through the last part of this. We're almost at the top of the hour. I'm going to go very quickly just down through to make sure we're aware. And then there'll be an additional webinars that we want to conduct, about 4 more that will actually take you through very specific, get in the weeds, talking about how governance questioning needs to be done. So anyhow, there's a difference here between the personal use of Office 365 and the organizational use. We need to be intelligent and smart in how we deploy it. We need to make sure we set the guidelines for, if it's BYOD, what is the social aspects do we want? Facebook application inside of SharePoint, are we going to do that? How are we going to use OneDrive for Business? How are we going to manage unstructured content? Those are all decisions that we need to talk about and move through. I'll talk real quickly about this. Who are the stakeholders? Without those sponsors, and John, and Tim, we've had great conversations around this. Without those sponsors, I don't care how good a migration tool you have or how good your planning and preparation is, if that stakeholder is not on board and understands what you're doing and why we're doing it, it will fail. And we need to make sure that we are working with our stakeholders and our sponsor to make sure that they know and understand what our challenges are and what we're trying to accomplish. And what are the organizational initiatives moving forward? What is our social plan? What preparing are we having to do to get through our social aspects? What are the strategic drivers? Social, that means, are we going to put in community sites? Are we using Yammer? Are we using Skype for Business? What does Yammer look like? Are we using discussion forums? What is our social media policy for the intranet? Are we going to put a Yammer feed right onto the corporate internet page, if that's what we're using SharePoint for? Are we expecting folks to be able to do that? How are we getting to that data? Let me give you an example. Yammer has the capability to do in-flight monitoring of all conversations that are going on. If we don't expose that capability to our stakeholders and our decision makers, they're not aware of it. And we need to make sure that they're aware that we can quarantine any conversation, send an alert to a manager, and say, hey, you need to talk to so-and-so because they were discussing or using profanity, or they were being a troll on Yammer. Those things are they're there, they need to be available, and we need to understand that in our social media. How are we going to communicate? Are we using Yammer as our primary conversational piece for praise and exposing great things that are happening in the organization? Okay. Are we using Skype for Business broadcast? How are we expecting to use Yammer town halls? Where are these things and conversations that are going to happen? What's the risk of that, and what is the reward trade-off of opening those collaborative environments? And I'm going fairly quickly, I apologize.
Yeah.
Here's a format that we use that we talk about. Go ahead, please.
Hey, regarding social, the irony is that many clients should already have a governance around social, right? Yammer was not the first social platform to show up at their doorstep. And yet, unfortunately, what we find is that when they start to use Yammer, that they didn't have many of these policies, monitoring of sites, external social sites. And that's, in many cases, it's evidence that these conversations not only haven't taken place around the decision for Office 365, but they've been somewhat lapsed in places where they should have taken place with the advent of social media. So
totally agreed.
Yeah.
The big university here in Minnesota that we did that with, they found out that, we are putting our U of M material on Facebook that we don't even know about. There are places that they weren't aware. And once we start to explore that and open those questions about how are you monitoring it, all of a sudden they're going, oh boy, we have 500 different places where our material is being referenced that we didn't even know about. And it becomes very important that we rein that in. Yeah. Agreed. Thanks, John. Great comment.
Mm-hmm.
This is how we go through the process when we sit down to talk with our clients and the best things that we can do. We can always add to this. And Tim, I think you added a little bit of project management in here as well. But we talk about what is the solution area, what is our vision. We fill these in and we complete this as part of our governance workshop. Who has ownership? What's a RACI? And let's establish a RACI on accountability and ownership. Let's identify the frequency of how this is going to be updated or used. And the governance overview is how much governance is needed for these different areas. So we go through a very formal process. Doesn't take a lot of time, but we ask the questions around these type of things. So we're going forward with that. Here's another example on the key questions. Where will the governance information live? Are we going to put it in SharePoint? How often are we going to be able to get to it, and how easily is it going to be modified? How will we communicate this out to the users? We put it in a SharePoint environment. We can search, keyword search. We put metadata on it and reference it in that method. Things that we'll talk about in these additional workshops. Today we're talking more about governance policies. We're going to talk about security and compliance. We're talking about user experience and user interface, and we've added on employee interface as well. That's very important. How are we provisioning the use of Office 365? Provisioning is not an IT term in this fact. How are we setting aside? How are we branding? How are we putting stuff together? How are we providing access? Are we going to use SharePoint as a full-blown ECRM tool, which is more than capable of? And how are we going to move that data around? And how are we going to make sure that our data is well used? What's the information architecture? Will we be using term store? Will we be adding metadata? Are we going to go to an outside party for more metadata? Intelligent communication, Skype for Business, Yammer, chat in Teams, etc. Content lifecycle, disposition and disposal of records. How's that going to work? What is our change management policy for changes? How are you going to support it, and how are you going to administrate it? I've gone over a little bit of time here than I wanted to, but I wanted to definitely give you Tim's and my email addresses and where we're at with that. So any questions or concerns? Any comments?
I wanted to thank you, Tim and Dave. I mean, the information is, gosh, not only is it near and dear to my heart, but it's relevant. Many of my clients underestimate the importance. I think the roles and responsibilities, and I think in what's asked of people in the organization for creating the policies, adhering to the policies, administering and supporting. I just think there's too few people that, one, are aware, or two, that have the time to fulfill the roles that's needed. There's too few people, and there's too much at stake. I do think that there's a few drivers that are changing our clients' perception. I think somebody mentioned earlier GDPR is definitely one of those eye-opening scenarios that you start to realize, just where some of your exposure is as you start to force yourself into quarantining information as part of an EU GDPR regulation. And people start to realize just how much exposure they have and how much little governance they've employed. So there's definitely an interesting time for many of our clients, and I think these topics have been very, very timely. So thank you for that.
You bet, and we certainly, this is just the beginning, the tip of the iceberg, John. We've got a lot of things to do, and hopefully we can help as we go forward in our planning and preparing for our clients, so we can help them be successful and increase their adoption rates by doing that.
We'll be looking for input on how this can help all of you with your clients, just to get your the foot in the door, just that, to start and really initiate that conversation. And it's just going to go from there, because John brought up a great point. Once we're done with these evaluations, it prescribes a long list of things that they need to do to get their governance under control. And often when our clients are asked, so if you continue as usual, what's your expectation of success? And they will admit, John, that they need help. They need someone else to do it, because this isn't their full-time job. They got their 9-to-5 job, et cetera, et cetera. So that's our sincere hope as we move forward, as we get more input from you about how we use this to to open those doors more widely to increase business. So with that, back to you, Dave.
Well, I think it's really important that we help a clear understanding, if we take away from anything from today's call, that we want to work with. And that to me is a very, very important word in how we engage with this. We want to work with our clients to help them understand what it is they need to be looking at. Because like we have said, there are many times they don't even know, nor do they have the time and the ability to know. They don't have the time to explore all of this. And we hope that we can work with our clients to help them better understand how they can do it without, look at the cost of rework. When they make mistakes and they have to rein things back in, that is so costly. I know
when we have to rescue something.
Yeah.
And how often have you heard something like this from an executive or that governance, that leadership, that C-suite? It's like I don't really know these things, but when I see it, I'll know. I know what I want.
You bet.
So at this point, everyone's I think John's bringing up a good point. Delaire and Brian have had to depart. They must have had a hard stop. So it's John, Tim, and Dave. But we are wrapping up. Any last items that we need to go through, Dave? Otherwise, this is a great start and more to come.